probably never heard of this country. But let me tell you this, what happened on the islands of Sao Tome and Príncipe over the next 500 years is equal parts brutal, bizarre, and remarkable. This is where our story begins. In 1470, Portuguese navigators sailing through the Gulf of Guinea stumbled onto two volcanic islands sitting right on the equator. And when they got there, they found, well, nothing. So naturally, the Portuguese thought, this is going to be a great real estate opportunity. Of course, I'm paraphrasing, but it felt that way, because they practically claimed ownership of the land. They named the bigger island after St. Thomas, whose feast day landed around their arrival. And the smaller one, they eventually called Príncipe, named after the Prince of Portugal, the son of King John II. Pretty straightforward enough. But see, finding the islands was the easy part. Getting people to actually live there, that's an entirely different problem. And listen, I'm going to be frank. The way they went about filling in the islands was questionable at best, terrible at worst. Portugal sent convicts and outcasts. But if that wasn't bad enough, in one of the most disturbing details of this entire story, they rounded up to 2,000 Jewish children, forcibly separated them from their parents during the mass expulsion of Jews from Portugal, and shipped them across the ocean. These children were put to work in sugarcane fields because in the late 1400s, sugar wasn't what it is today. It wasn't stuff you casually dump into your morning coffee. It was valuable, like luxury level valuable. And the volcanic soil of Sao Tome? Turns out it was perfect for growing it. So by the early 1500s, Sao Tome became a global sugar powerhouse. And with that came the need for more labour. That's why, on top of the surviving Jewish children, enslaved people were brought over from the African mainland by the thousands. Initially, they were only sent over to work the fields. But over time, Sao Tome became a massive transit hub for the entire Atlantic slave trade. From Angola, the Congo, and the West African coast, ships would stop here, transfer cargo onto larger vessels, restock supplies, and then make the long crossing to Brazil and the Caribbean. In fact, during the early boom of the Brazilian slave trade, the vast majority of enslaved people sent to Brazil passed right through this tiny island hub. And then, in 1595, the people finally fought back. This is when we meet a man named Amador. He was born into slavery right here on the island, and he organised what became one of the largest revolts in their history. He proclaimed himself king, and then went to work systematically burning dozens of sugar mills across the island. In the end, he was able to destroy the plantations and dismantle the colonial infrastructure piece by piece. For a few weeks, it looked as though the colonial project on Sao Tome was on the verge of collapse, but the Portuguese forces managed to regroup and crush the revolt. Amador was eventually captured, and in January 1596 he was executed. After the revolt, the sugar economy completely fell apart. Brazilian competition was already eating into profits, and the chaos of constant raids and destroyed infrastructure finished it off. So Sao Tome had no choice but to switch gears from a major producer to more of a shipping way station. At the same time, the mixed-race Creole population grew into the majority as the European population shrank. But there came an agricultural resurgence in the 19th century. Not sugar anymore, no, but something you might love even more: coffee and cocoa. By the early 1900s, Sao Tome was once again among the world's top cocoa producers, which you might think is a cause for celebration. But you forget. The islands were still a colony, and the massive plantations were run by powerful, often absentee Portuguese landlords, meaning the conditions for workers remained brutal, relying on forced labour long after slavery was officially abolished in 1875. Keyword, officially, because on February 3rd, 1953, it all boiled over. Portuguese authorities and landowners, operating under the Salazar dictatorship back in Lisbon, brutally suppressed protesting Creole peasants on Sao Tome. They called it the Batepá massacre. Hundreds of people were wiped out, with some estimates putting the toll as high as 2,000. Think about it. For a country with a total population of only around 60,000 at the time, losing that many people in a single event was devastating. That's when they decided they needed to be free. Thus, the movement for independence sparked. It built slowly through the 1960s. Then, in April 1974, a revolution back in Portugal toppled the Salazar regime, and the new government in Lisbon decided to let the colonies go. So, on July 12, 1975, Sao Tome and Príncipe finally became an independent nation. But our story's far from over, because what came after was, well, let's just say, eventful. Here's a quick rundown. At one time, there was a strict one-party state. Then, nationalisation policies that accidentally collapsed the cocoa industry. In 1995, there was a coup that lasted exactly 1 week. Then, another coup in 2003. One thing's for sure. Politics here was never boring. But that's a different story altogether. Right now, we want to know exactly where all these things happened. And lucky for you, I came prepared. To start off, Sao Tome and Príncipe sits right off the west coast of Central Africa. It's divided into 2 main islands, a handful of smaller islets, and almost nothing else except water in every direction. And like I said earlier, this country sits almost exactly on the equator. In fact, the southern tip of Sao Tome Island is literally 2 kilometres, or just about 1.2 miles, north of it. That's not even the wildest part. Because did you know that there's actually a monument on a small islet called Rollers where you can physically stand right on the equator line? I mean, it sounds like a fun afternoon activity, until you realise you need a ferry just to get there. But still, that's got to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience, right? Unfortunately, not a lot of people are aware of this, because Sao Tome and Príncipe is one of the least visited countries in Africa. So allow me to change your mind. Of the 2 islands, Sao Tome is the bigger one. We know this already. But you probably didn't know that it holds about 85% of the total land area and 96% of the entire population. At its highest point, you'll find Pico Sao Tome, which rises to about 2,024 metres or 6,640 feet. And contrary to what a lot of people think of when they hear the word Africa, this country is far from barren. The whole central zone alone is dense. Not only that, but there's actually a lush jungle that's cut through by rivers and streams rushing down in every direction. Didn't see that one coming, did you? Well, wait until I tell you about Príncipe. For one, it's geologically one of the oldest islands in the chain. See, Príncipe formed approximately 31 million years ago, making it older than Sao Tome and most of its volcanic neighbours along the Cameroon line. For context, that's before many of the mountain ranges in Europe even existed. But that's not even the most impressive fact about this place. Because let me tell you a story. In 1919, there was a solar eclipse that was visible from Príncipe. And at the time, there was a British astronomer named Arthur Eddington who photographed the bending of light around the sun. Doesn't sound like much, but actually, that simple photo provided the first observational proof of Einstein's theory of general relativity. So without this tiny island in the Gulf of Guinea, one of the most important scientific theories in human history might have stayed unproven for years longer. Moral of the story: don't underestimate the underdogs, especially underrated countries. They just might surprise you. And before we jump into the economy, I just have to tell you this. When it comes to wildlife, some people tend to refer to São Tomé and Príncipe as the Galápagos of Africa, which honestly has its own merit. After all, the isolation of these islands over millions of years produced species found nowhere else on Earth, like endemic birds, rare reptiles, and 6 species of frogs that are found only here. For a small country of just over 1,000 square kilometres, or about 386 square miles, there's a lot going on inside it. That's why I'm telling you, don't wait until tourists flock to this country. It's only a matter of time. So if you're ready, I'll link you to all the amazing deals you need in the description below. Grab it before it's too late. This is your sign to finally see and admire the land for yourself. But just so you know what you're getting yourself into, let me tell you a little bit about it. First, about a third of the country is protected by rainforest. The Obo Natural Park covers the southern half of Sao Tome and nearly all of Príncipe, and inside it is where you'll find the creatures we talked about earlier. And if there's one thing that will drive people to book flights, it's to witness things they never have before. Which brings me to my second point: tourism. I told you this country is going to be big one day, and the government is looking at making that happen sooner than later. Because finally they realise that all the ingredients are here: pristine beaches, exotic wildlife, volcanic landscapes straight out of a nature documentary, and a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve on Príncipe. You know, the kind of atmosphere that travellers who've already done Bali, the Maldives and everywhere else in between are actively searching for. Between the two islands, Principe is leaning hard into high-end ecotourism. It's small and exclusive, so it fits the bill. And its selling point? You got it. Unparalleled sights and experiences. But here's the thing about building a tourism industry on a small island. Everything is connected. Meaning, if one piece breaks, it becomes a domino effect. Like, for instance, the roads. The coastal roads linking fishing communities, agricultural zones, and tourism resorts together. Some vital sections sit just about 1.5 to 2 metres, or roughly 5 to 6.5 feet, above sea level. So when they flood, and trust me, they do flood, entire communities lose income overnight. That's why the government, which is backed by a $12.8 million grant facilitated through the World Bank, is currently rebuilding those roads using nature-based solutions. From that project alone, that's going to open up more opportunities of livelihood for the locals. And just like how floods can impact the community, the solution too has the power to do the same. Because despite this island nation being an isolated destination, its culture is quite the opposite. And let me tell you why. When you have no indigenous population, when every single person on these islands is descended from someone who was either brought here by force, sent here as punishment, or arrived chasing an opportunity, what you get is not one culture, you get a collision of several. And somehow it all works out. Take food, for example. You've got African spices with Portuguese techniques blending together to create one harmonious dish. Not to mention the mix of fresh Atlantic seafood and tropical fruit, all in the same pot. I'm not making this up. Their national dish is called kahlulu. It's made with smoked fish and prawns cooked down with okra, eggplant, tomato, and a combination of spices that takes a second to place because, frankly, it doesn't taste like anything else on earth. Or so they say, and that's just the beginning. Remember coffee? Here, it's not just a drink to wake you up in the morning. It's actually used as a seasoning, a flavouring agent, if you will, especially in savoury dishes, like their local coffee-infused chicken. I know it sounds strange, but these islands were producing coffee for centuries before most of the world had even tried it. So of course they had time to experiment. This kind of unique take doesn't stop at food, obviously. It extends to other aspects of their culture, primarily music. Principe developed its own rhythm called Daisha, and Sao Tome has Usua and Sokope. I don't know about you, but I've never heard of those terms before. But guess what? They're all shaped by something we're very much familiar with: African drumming and Portuguese ballroom dancing. In other words, the colonizers brought their formal dances, the Creole population absorbed them, took them completely apart, and rebuilt something entirely new from the pieces. Then there's Chilali, which, if you ask me, deserves its own documentary. But I'll tell you about it anyway. Chilali is a traditional theatrical performance that tells the story of Emperor Charlemagne. It's a medieval European epic, performed in elaborate costumes by Santomean communities who have been staging it for centuries. I know what you're thinking. This is completely random. And I get it, but wait till you hear this. Underneath all the costumes and choreography, Chiloli is actually a community processing the story of power, betrayal, and justice, just through the lens of someone else's myth. Because for a long time under colonial rule, the people weren't allowed to tell their own stories, or voice their grievances out loud. So they found a loophole. And really, that's the whole story of this place, isn't it? Sao Tome and Príncipe spent 500 years being defined entirely by what other people wanted from it. And through all of that, the people here built something that couldn't be nationalised, colonised, or exported. It's a culture assembled from fragments, forged under pressure, and it's still standing strong today. So if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.